My name is Pumla Khadebe again, and I have the pleasure of being this webinar's facilitator. So just housekeeping rules. Can we kindly ensure that we keep our mics off and our cameras off as well? And make use of the chat box below to just introduce yourselves and to share any thoughts and comments throughout this discussion. And I would like to officially welcome you to the 4th episode of the Gift webinar series called Women Up to No Good, where we tackle questions that are of most importance when it comes to female sexual and reproductive health. And we find and incorporate that with research in innovative research to find solutions on how we can improve this. So this GIFT webinar series is part of the GIFT Teams initiative, which is currently being led at the University of Cape Town, where I am currently at the moment. So if you would all just like to learn more about what GIFT is and the team behind it, please kindly visit our GIFT website and read up more on the GIFT test. And be sure to sign up for our e-newsletter as well to get the latest updates on the GIFT device and any hot topics on GIFT. With no further ado, I just want to explain what today's webinar series is. So today we will just be talking pleasure down south, where we will just infuse joy into sexual health and research practices. So I remember this morning, I told my mom about this webinar and my role in it. And the moment she heard sexual health, she initially went to, you ha mtanam. So even in school, you are now talking about sex. So the whole concept of sexual health, I finally understood that it's not really fully understood. So I just want to, explain that briefly, although I know my speakers will talk about this a bit more, but sexual health is kind of a sensitive topic. And at times people fear talking about it, but it includes all physical, emotional, and even mental well-being. And it also encompasses the overall wellness of relationships. And it's not just disease. It's not only just based on disease prevention. So just for today, we hope that today's discussion will just deliver that and create a positive mindset around sexual health messaging, especially in the clinical practice. And as we continue to actually celebrate World Sexual Health Day, which was on the 4th of September, we thought, what better way to celebrate it than to invite people that actually specialize in sexual health to share their insights and strategies on how we can actually just better understand what it means when we talk about sexual health, but in a less pathologized way, so that we can actually put what sexual health is into practicality, right? So let's challenge conventional topics today and find new strategies of actually thinking, shall we? But before we can actually start, the webinar will actually just follow like a structured format where each of our 3 speakers will get an opportunity to just share their insights on today's topic, which is pleasure down south, infusing joy into sexual health and research practices. And then from there, we will have a Q&A session where I will be taking your questions and addressing them wherever I can. And then after that, we will let our speakers take us through the discussion as well. Also, please ensure that today's session, just for everyone to understand, today's session will be recorded, but will be made available on our Gift YouTube channel, where you can also catch up on previous webinar series that you might have missed, or if you want to go back and just get what you could have missed even on this webinar as well. And also just, join the conversation online. Go into your YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or it's called X now, and continue the conversation by using the following hashtags: hashtag sexual health, hashtag World Sexual Health Day, hashtag Gift Africa, hashtag Made in Africa. So can we also just get a round of applause just to see that everyone is fully engaged? A round of applause for our three guest speakers as they are about to join in. And I just want to see everyone. Just put your thumbs up, clap, anything. Give me a reaction so I can see. I see. Thank you so much. I thank you so much, you guys. So please just continue introducing yourselves on the chat and make sure to pose any questions, comments as we continue the discussion and throughout the webinar as well. So just to get on the jinx and the juice of the show, we have invited three remarkable female scientists who are actually specializing in the field of sexual health and well-being, who we believe will properly lay the foundation of today's discussion. They will each talk us through their different standing points and reflect on the different ways in which they have put in efforts to empower women to take charge of their sexual health and reproductive health as well. So I will begin off with it's such an honor to be doing such introductions, you guys. So I'm a bit excited. But allow me to introduce Dr. Kirsten Mitchell. And it is such an honor. It is such an honor, Doc. So can I just please have a virtual round of applause again for Dr. Kirsten Mitchell, who I present to you. So sorry, I will just present all speakers in the order in which they will be speaking in. Dr. Kirsten Mitchell is a well-renowned medical research council investigator from the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Her research focuses on finding translational ways of just understanding how social relationships can contribute to health and well-being, as well as finding how being in a relationship with someone can contribute to different health factors. She also focuses on sexual well-being and gender based violence and holds a wide publication range in the field of sexual health and reproductive health. I also have Dr. Jessie Ford. Dr. Jessie Ford is a sociologist from Columbia University in the United States of America. She conducts research in social science and public health, and her work actually focuses on how expectations and different inequalities around gender and sexuality actually shape different sexual violence and health and pleasure as a whole. Her work brings into perspective sexual and reproductive health by showing how important it is to have social interactions with, special attention to how gender inequalities and reproduction actually affect sexual health interactions. And lastly, we have Dr. Pamela Gumbi, who is a mucosal immunologist from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And Pam is of personal phone to me because she is my previous and one of my most favorite supervisors. We worked together during my master's research looking at different vaginal products, and we obtained an MSc with a distinction. This is Pam, guys, who is a mucosal immunologist, and she highly specializes in sexual health research that focuses in finding ways to prevent HIV and other sexually transmitted infections in young women and adolescent girls. So with no further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kirsten Mitchell.
So I'm going to talk to you this morning about sexual well-being. So attempts to capture the concept of sexual well-being are actually very recent. And we have argued as a research team here in Glasgow that sexual well-being can be seen as a distinct and revolutionary concept for health, and as one of 4 intertwining focal areas requiring public health attention. The other 3 are sexual justice, which is about rights and citizenship, sexual health, which covers things like fertility management and STIs and sexual function, and then sexual pleasure. And then turning to sexual well-being, which is the focus of this talk, many people are familiar with the idea of well-being, so they think about it in relation to their own lives. People say things like, being in nature is good for my well-being, and good employers talk about well-being at work. So I like to think of sexual well-being as just another aspect of our broader well-being, but it's just different because it's one that we don't generally discuss or talk about with other people. So what does sexual well-being mean? We define sexual well-being as feeling respected, safe, at ease, supported, while also having a sense of self-worth and agency in relation to sex and sexuality. We recognise it as integral to consensual, healthy and pleasurable sexual experiences and relationships. And we also recognise that sexual well-being is an ongoing process continually influenced by the environment, sexual partners, family, peers, education, health systems, and so on. And we've actually isolated 6 domains that we think together capture this idea of sexual well-being: respect, self-esteem, comfort with sexuality, sexual safety, sexual agency, and support in one's sexual life. So how can a focus on sexual well-being help? Could this be a concept that could contribute something different and unique to our understanding of healthy sexuality? Could it help us think about public health goals in ways that reorientate a focus away from risk and adversity and towards more positive sexuality? So I do think that reframing sex positively is important because pleasure is the main reason that people have sex. And sex can and should be a positive aspect of people's lives. Shifting away from a risk-centric approach can also help us gain a deeper understanding of everyday sexual expression. And this will then feel more relevant to people in their actual lives and make them more likely to engage with services and take on the advice that we as health professionals might give them. Sexual well-being also helps us acknowledge and confront the impact of structural influences such as inequalities to access to services and sex education. And it also highlights how mental health issues, stigma, despair, trauma, relational injury can affect engagement with sexual health services, vulnerability to risk, and capability to experience positive sexuality. And finally, by focusing on sexual well-being, by focusing on things like thoughts and feelings in relation to sex, that helps us connect sexual behavior to mental health and well-being. What I want to do just very briefly is whiz through each of the 6 domains that we have built up and just show you how they connect. And I've just focused on one aspect of sexual health, which is STI risk and transmission. I just want to just highlight very quickly how each of our domains can really help change the way that we think about tackling STIs. I should say, I forgot to just say a little bit about how our concept of sexual well-being was put together. It actually stems from qualitative and conceptual work that we did preparing for our British National Survey of Sexual Attitudes and Lifestyles. And then we refined the concept through a Delphi study with stakeholders in Scotland, because this is actually something that the Scottish Government have decided that they would like to prioritise as a policy ambition for the country. So just returning to the domains, if we look at sexual respect, this is about feeling positively regarded as a sexual person, and that should be regardless of your STI status, reproductive choices, personal characteristics of identity. It's about feeling accepted and included, being respectful to others, and having mutual respect within sexual partners. So if we think about STIs, the right to same-sex partnership, for instance, is only fairly recent, and it's actually only a right in some countries and not all. And an ecological study found that passing gay civil union laws in Europe was associated with a 24% reduction in reported syphilis cases. Lack of respect also affects the ways that people engage with services, and evidence shows that sexual minorities can face such barriers. So we move on to sexual self-esteem, which we define as valuing oneself as a sexual person. So this is about feeling worthy of respect, worthy of enjoying one's sexuality, and able to work through negative experiences. And here we found a recent review found that incorporating messages about pleasure can actually increase the effectiveness of health interventions. So strong evidence that it's worthwhile doing that for the actual outcomes of improving rates of STI transmission. And studies also find that having an STI affects people's self-esteem. It can make them feel afraid of sex and sexually depressed. And I wonder sometimes how often these feelings are aired in interactions in busy genital urinary medicine clinics, and whether people ever get support from any of these about any of these feelings, or whether the focus is always on just treating the STI and then that's the job done. So comfort with sexuality is about feeling at ease, and a lot of the way we are as a society, a lot of the harmful things that we do to people sexually is actually underpinned by our general discomfort with sexuality. So someone with high well-being would feel at ease when thinking about, talking about, or having sex. And there's lots of evidence to show that guilt, shame, and embarrassment are common when people are seeking treatment for STI testing, and they do affect willingness to seek treatment and inform partners. And within couples, discomfort talking about sex often leads to non-disclosure of an STI to a previous partner. If we look then at sexual agency, we define this as someone having the freedom and capacity to choose positive, consensual, and pleasurable sexual experiences. And I think agency is something that particularly pertains to women's experience of sex. And this includes feeling one has the freedom and capacity to negotiate whether, how, and with whom one has sex, and to be able to take action to prevent unwanted sex. And we know this is so important has been so important in the transmission of HIV in heterosexual couples where women haven't been able to negotiate condom use. So, we know that women who are economically dependent on men are at higher risk of HIV. And also, this affects men too. Men with history of forced sexual experiences are more likely to report gonorrhea, chlamydia, herpes, warts, and syphilis in their lifetime. Then moving to sexual safety, and here we define this as feeling free from sexual harassment, exploitation, or violence in the present and in the future. We know if we look at sex workers that the threat of police harassment, of displacement, often moves sex workers into isolated locations and reduces their opportunity for risk reduction for things like negotiating condoms. And we also know that high rates of violence are associated with risk behaviour among women attending STI clinics. And finally, supporting one's sex life. And this is about having someone supported to talk to if needed, and access to accurate, comprehensive, and non-judgmental sexual health information. So an example of this is people repartnering in midlife, which we see quite a lot in the UK. And actually, a lot of our sexual health messages are targeted at young people. And so midlifers who are repartnering can feel that they find it difficult to access information that they need that's relevant to them about safer sex, and they tend to disconnect from those messages. We also find a high level of social support is hugely important in helping people reduce risk-related behaviours among sex workers and people living with HIV. So lots of different, that's just a snapshot of different research studies showing how important these dimensions of sexual well-being are to other aspects of sexual health. I mean, we could have looked at unplanned pregnancy or contraceptive uptake, condom uptake, but they're relevant throughout. Just very briefly, I think a starting point, if we are going to really take on board a sex positive or well-being approach, is around the policy framework of a country. And that then provides the supportive policy context in which we can kind of really promote sexually positive approaches within programs, which is the kind of next step to all of this. I actually had an MSc student this summer have a look at how many countries actually have positive sexuality through their framework. So she perused the internet and looked at 198 UN nations to see how many of them had online publicly available policies. She found that only 37 had standalone policies. Only 11 substantially discussed sex positivity, and only 5 made specific policy commitments. These were Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Scotland, and Spain. So we're in a very lucky position to be supporting the Scottish Government in taking this forward as a nation. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. Just as a final note, these references that I give here link to the measure that we've developed that captures a lot of the ideas I've spoken about, because we can't translate this into programming and services unless we have like concrete ways of measuring what we're aiming for and what success looks like. So we have developed a 13-item measure that may be helpful to some of you or interest to some of you in your work, and these are the references to that work, and very happy to follow up with people if they're interested in knowing more. So I'll stop sharing there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kirsten Mitchell. That was amazing. That was a lovely talk. I enjoyed it throughout. So I just want to check if we have any questions in the chat. Okay, while we're waiting for questions, I actually have a question. And you spoke about how talking about sex as partners can trigger guilt, and it makes people feel very uncomfortable. I just want to know if there have been any misconceptions while you were doing any field work that have driven people to actually feeling like this, and what people can do to actually move away from the stigma and have like an open and happy sexual life, a healthy sexual relationship.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult. It's one of these really paradoxical situations where we see sex represented, or sexual issues represented, a lot on media. It's obviously all over the internet. It's in the news a lot. And yet we find it incredibly difficult to talk about. And because of that, or ask questions, and there's shame, there's embarrassment, there's fear of not knowing. Most people grow up with myths around sex that go unaddressed. And a lot of the work that sexual health providers do, if they're on it and attending to what people are saying, is about, redressing those myths and giving the people reassurance of perhaps scripts that they've grown up with that are actually harmful for their sexual well-being or for their partner's sexual well-being, and that are preventing them from having a fully positive sexual experiences. And unfortunately, globally, we seem to be going back in terms of comprehensive sex education. There's been a lot of pushback around the globe against comprehensive sex education. But it's so important in establishing, you know, being able to give people the correct information and being able to give people the language and the comfort to be able to talk about it. But I think health professionals also play a key role as well, and maybe examining their own comfort or discomfort around sexual matters and how that then influences the way that they interact with patients. So everyone has a role to play. And when we had that, that's partly why we have that dimension of comfort with sexuality, which is quite unusual. We don't often see that around.
Sorry, Dr. Kirsten. I'm so sorry. I think I got too excited with the talk and I wanted to discuss it further. I think questions have to come at the end. I am breaking all the housekeeping rules here. So can I just quickly move over to Dr. Jessie Ford, and then we'll take questions at the end of all the 3 talks. My apologies. Please hold the thoughts and then we'll discuss at the end.
All right. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, fantastic. All right, so good morning. I'm Dr. Jessie Ford from New York, morning my time. Such a pleasure to be here. And today I'm going to be talking about how to think about integrating pleasure into our sexual health work as practitioners, as researchers, as advocates, as pleasure-curious people. I want to really build from Dr. Mitchell's work on sexual well-being, which is so important in like laying the foundation as we all show why this matters so much. And in my talk, I want to really emphasize pleasure as a starting place for us to think about grounding our work. This has been a big passion of mine for many years. And what I will say is that great things are happening in the area of sexual pleasure right now. You know, historically, I think pleasure has often gotten sidelined as something that was like frivolous or decadent or not as important. And what we are finding is that pleasure is really important. The research on pleasure is growing. And I want to share some of these resources and also recent like evidence base related to pleasure so that people feel justified in focusing on this as we move out from this workshop. So also, because pleasure has historically been stigmatized, Dr. Mitchell touched on this, it's really important to legitimize it and operationalize our measurement of sexual pleasure so that academics, NGOs, startup companies, all of us can begin to acknowledge the importance of pleasure in people's lives, in their health and their happiness. And I probably don't have to tell this group, you're all here, but sexual pleasure really matters to people. When you ask them about why they have sex, sexual pleasure is often a main reason. Research shows solo and partnered sexual pleasure are important for health and well-being. And of course, while I don't want to focus too much on like the negative or the risk-focused disease part, because that is so often the focus, we have to acknowledge that we still have a huge global burden of sexual health outcomes and challenges. And from a public health perspective, what I'll argue today, what I hope you'll take with you as we try to think about pleasure, is that the reason to emphasize pleasure is because it helps protect people at least as well, if not better than our current approaches. So why not try? Why not lean into it? And if providers and programs can really support people in ways that incorporate pleasure, it's more likely that you'll meet the needs and the realities and ultimately the objectives of your programs. And I'm going to remind us all of the World Health Organization, WHO definition of sexual health, which requires the potential for both pleasurable and safe sexual experiences. I think people sometimes forget this. And I'm an academic researcher, so I know a lot of, or I'm more aware of a lot of the academic articles, the evidence base that's coming out. So please get in touch. I can share these articles with you. But what I will say is, I recently wrote an article with a colleague calling for more sex positive epidemiology. So thinking about how do we study pleasure, measure it alongside STIs and familiar outcomes, acknowledging that stigma is part of why we haven't addressed pleasure until now. It's why people feel nervous about measuring pleasure in their clinical settings, or in their study. We have to acknowledge that stigma's there, but that we all bring a lot of expertise to these longstanding issues. We need the help of people on the ground, of epidemiologists, of all practitioners to figure out how do we better measure this and address it and incorporate it. And I will say yesterday was the 3-year anniversary of the World Association for Sexual Health Declaration on Sexual Pleasure. If you're not familiar with this, it's a great step forward in pleasure promotion. And this document was signed in South Africa on September 11th, 2021. So this is an actual declaration signed by multiple countries and people at the World Association for Sexual Health Congress. So this is a document that you can use. And there was a long history behind building the case for sexual pleasure, grounding it in sexual health and sexual rights work. And there's been a series of really profound, powerful documents. If you're ever interested in this history, or you want to do a reading circle with people, with colleagues, I suggest looking at these documents because they're all really well done. And then the Declaration of Sexual Pleasure itself, I will just point you to it really quickly. And we define sexual pleasure as complex and diverse. We acknowledge that feelings around sexual pleasure are subjective, shared, solo, socially constructed, can include diverse sexual activities. Sexual pleasure can be physical, emotional, cognitive, mind-body connection, such as losing oneself. But sexual pleasure has also been described as the enjoyment derived from sexual interaction with another person. Sexual rights are key, and they really need to be in place to ensure a positive experience for all. And in this declaration, we also position pleasure as fundamental to sexual health and well-being, to being alive. Pleasure as part of sexual rights as human rights. Pleasure as including diverse sexual experiences, and as something that needs to be integrated into policy, program, clinics, to meet individuals' needs, aspirations, and realities, and to ultimately contribute to global health and sustainability. And then crucially, I just want to emphasize this again, Dr. Mitchell touched on this, but sexual rights are really key in linking sexual pleasure. So sexuality experiences that generate pleasure can intersect with complicated legal and social structures that prioritize pleasure for some, while limiting or even punishing pleasure for others. There are still places in the world that people go to jail or are killed for certain forms of sex, extramarital sex, homosexual sex. So sexual pleasure embedded in gender and social class and social privilege, the same structures that create inequities. So we must be aware of this in our work to ensure that sexual pleasure is happening. We need sexual rights, and we need to address the elements of sexual experience outside of personal agency and action. So while it's essential to normalize and promote and celebrate pleasure, we must also continue this work of sexual rights. And, I'm an academic, so I will just say, get in touch. There is increasingly evidence showing that sexual pleasure and sexual expression is good for it lowers your mortality rate. It's good for cardiovascular disease, lower rates of prostate cancer in men, delayed menopause in women, increased relationship satisfaction. And these are well-done studies vouched by epidemiologists. So the data is there and it's growing. And I'll also point you to this great special issue on sexual pleasure. It came out in 2021. And there are a series of amazing articles, including some that focus on gender, trauma-informed pleasure approaches, thinking about pleasure across the life course, and case studies in a technical document in this special issue. So again, I'll emphasize resources are out there. If you're curious, I think people feel nervous about thinking about pleasure in their work. There's stuff out there that can support you. Other resources I love, there's a pleasure meter, which is you can take a sexual history while also asking about pleasure. That's that training toolkit up there. Fulfill is a sexual rights document for young people. A recent systematic review that Dr. Mitchell mentioned. New special issues coming out on sex positive sex education in the coming year at Frontiers. And then increasingly, I'm doing work with the UN now, with the WHO, and with the US Center for Disease and CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where we are thinking about better ways to measure sexual health, including pleasure and rights. And finally, another resource I love is...
Dr. Ford?
Yes.
So sorry. We are running a bit over time.
Okay. This
Yeah.
is the last slide. Okay, so
No.
the Pleasure Project has this great pleasure wave I'll point you to. And then I'm all done. So good luck. Resources are out there. Let's keep building the pleasure wave together. Don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll stop my share.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ford. My apologies to rush you. So with no further ado, Dr. Pamela Gumbi.
Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to share some of the work that I do, which also involves understanding sexual pleasure. So mine is very focused. So it's looking at the women and young women in the rural KZN, South Africa. Okay, next. Okay, so just to give you a bit of context, how this work came about. So the clinic in Caprisa was offering sexual and reproductive health for adolescent girls in rural KwaZulu-Natal. And so it came about that, you know, during their visits, the young women would be discussing outside how they enhance their sexual pleasure. And then a study that was led by Dr. Humphreys, they organized focus group discussions where women met, the young women met, and they discussed how they enhance sexual pleasure for themselves. And based on the study, these are just some of the quotes that the women were saying during their focus group discussions. So Wendy, mind you, these are not their real names, so they could just talk openly about what they thought. So she said, you do not become a virgin. You just become tighter. He loves you a lot more than his other girlfriends. So speaking to the fact that, you know, the motivation is to be preferred by the partner. And here's another example. So Big I said, I know of what they call old Chinese. It looks like a small sweet. They say you eat it and the man will never leave you once you've used it. So again, this quote here, it speaks to the fact that one of the goals is to be able to retain the partner. And this last example here that I'm going to show by Beyonce. So apparently Beyonce had used the product, but she had overdone it a bit. And she reported that I was too hot So he hit me because I was too hot. So meaning that sometimes when they explore with these products, they do not always get the intended outcome. So now, based on this information, we then did another study where we were now focusing on individuals, collecting information on social behavioral factors as well as biological factors. So this was a study that was nicely designed where we wanted to now link the two, the social parts and as well as biological. So when you are using these products for pleasure, what are the implications biologically? So from this same cohort then, we discovered that, my things are hidden now because of the camera, sorry. So it has been shown that the STI burden in this area is quite high. So in this study, we had adolescent girls as well as adult women. So, but the majority were adolescent girls, there were 192. And we saw that in this area, the burden of STIs is quite high. So if you know the normal prevalence values for these STIs, in this particular area, they're quite high, where chlamydia was at 28%, BV was 63%, and gonorrhea at 7%, and trichomonas at 7%. Okay, so also still just on the context, so there is a bit of a conflict. So the women in this area are obviously conflicted. So just to speak a bit on why what is it that as individuals they are looking for? So as we have seen with the previous discussions as well, like most women would have sex for intimacy and as well as connection. And also they want to take care of their sexual health, right? And as individuals, they also have their own preferences when it comes to sexual choices. But on the other hand, there is a pressure now coming from the partner. So in this area, there are gender and power dynamics. And most of the women from the studies that we've conducted, most of them are unemployed. The percentage, when we looked at the adult women, there's 81% of them were unemployed. And they are dependent on their partners and families and social grants for support. So there is quite a bit of pressure for them to prioritize the partner's pleasure. And then on the other hand, because of the high burden of STIs and women taking care of their sexual health, and usually the burden is put on the young women. So as I've shown you in the previous slide, there's high prevalence of STIs as well as HIV in this area. So they do visit clinics quite a lot and get messages around their sexual health. So however, because they do not openly talk about the other pressures that they experience, so there's a gap in terms of communication with the clinical person as well as what they really do on their own as individuals. So we're just dealing with a complex decision-making on sexual enhancing products. And we see that sometimes these can often be at the expense of the health of the woman. So here I just took time, these are some of the main products that were reported by women that they spend time to find and discuss and, recommend to each other around the clinic. So some of these are traditionally made products, and some would be the common things that you find in the kitchen. So I'll just highlight the ones that came out as most popular. So for instance, Stony, which is the ginger beer, it's well known in this area as one of the main sexual enhancing products, and they say that it tightens the woman's vagina. And the whole suite at the bottom here. So here, these were all just products that they use for ingestion. So which means they took them orally. But then on the other hand, you had these ones which they could take orally as well as insert them or apply them in the genital tract. So Halls is also one of the popular ones, which is basically a menthol sweet, but they say that it gives a unique sensation. And also to mention another one, which was quite popular amongst the adolescent girls, it's the alarm, which is aluminum potassium sulfate, right? So this is normally used as an adjuvant in vaccines, but it's quite popular amongst the young girls. And they say it's used for the cleaning and also tightening the genital tract. So this one is inserted in the female genital tract. Bluestone was also one of the popular ones. This is a copper sulfate powder. It is known in this area as a very good sexual enhancer. This is the tobacco that has nicotine in it. It's also inserted internally. Okay, so this just gives you like a summary, which I won't repeat again, but it just shows that when it comes to the ones that were taken orally, we saw this both in younger women and older women. But my point here is to show that, you know, the adolescent girls were more likely to explore. So they reported applying internally quite a wide range of products compared to the adults. And here I'm just showing that the main reasons for using these products, they differed quite slightly when you're looking at the adolescent girls and adults, where with the adolescent girls, the main reason was to tighten and warm the genital tract. Whereas for adults, it was more for stamina combined with warming and tightening. And when you look at the times when these products were used, you can see that the vast majority reported that they used them just before sex. So which means these products were mainly used to prepare for sex. This is my last slide, where obviously I said we wanted to also look at the biological factors. So these are some of the things we've started measuring. So we've looked at the cytokines, which indicate an inflamed female genital tract. And we've looked at a number of them, but I've chosen these two, which were interesting. And we saw that with most of the women, when you compare the ones that were using to those that were not using to those that were using, these cytokines which indicate inflammation were higher. And we saw this with adolescent girls as well as adults. And mind you, the presence of these cytokines is associated with the recruitment of cells which are loved by HIV to infect, which are targets for HIV infection. So just in conclusion, so in this work that we've done, we are looking at women based in rural KZN, where there's high unemployment, high rates of STI, gender power imbalances, and also a high use of the sexual enhancing products. So we also see that these products are primarily used for the partner, not necessarily for the pleasure of the women, to either retain the partner or for the partner to love them more. And despite the popularity of these products, as I've shown preliminarily, that these could compromise the health. So we really need to think carefully about the messaging around the sexual pleasure and balance that with the possible risk to HIV and STI infection. So with that said, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity again and all the people that I've shown in my last slide. Thank you so much, Pumla.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pam. I want to thank all the three speakers. The conversation was just very insightful. So in the last 5 minutes, I would like to just take 1 or 2 questions because I think we've ran way over time. And yeah, and then after the questions, can I just ask everyone to just spend a few minutes to just complete an evaluation form for this webinar. The link has been added to the chat. So yeah. So very quickly, I just want to go to a question that was asked. And I think it's, yeah, I think it's quite important. Someone asked how we could possibly incorporate self-esteem or mental health support in sexual services in more resource-constrained settings.
I'm happy to just to respond.
I think, Dr. Mitchell, I think you are more appropriate for
Yeah,
this
so
question.
it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and a lot of clinics and everywhere are very tight for time. A lot of health professionals don't feel equipped. But I think even just recognizing it, one way is just to recognize that somebody might be feeling a bit you know, that they're a bit lost or a bit ashamed or a bit embarrassed, and just putting it out there and acknowledging it can be done very simply and very quickly. Going forward, in an ideal world, we'd have better linkages between mental health and sexual health. So either through people in sexual health who've got that extra mental health training, which does happen in lots of places, or mental health providers, you know, with sexology training, and lots of therapists have that, but just getting those connections, and that kind of joined up care, I think, is the ideal.
That's very, very, very true. Another quick question. Someone asked, and I think this is directed to Pam. They are asking if these products that you were talking about are used in KZN are effective, and have they been claimed? And are you testing whether these products are scientifically safe for use as well?
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. So in terms of proving whether they are effective for sexual pleasure or not, we take what the women report as pleasure, and we have percentages where we have like a certain number of women reporting that such product is giving them that effect, and we take that word for it. But in terms of their safety, there are studies that we are doing currently where we want to test now in vitro the products themselves. So we are collecting the products that these women are bringing to us, and we want to check in terms of inflammation and changes in the microbiome. Are there certain bacteria that grow in their presence or not? So that will be interesting for us to see. And then we're hoping then to report back to women to say, hey, maybe with this product, you need to be a little bit more careful as it might change your microbiome, etc. But there is work planned to test the products themselves in the lab. Thank you.
That is true. So there's a combo here, Stony and Halls. So that needs to be verified as well, hey? I know in KZN it's quite famous. Anyways,
Yeah,
a last question, although there are very interesting questions here. This one says, the environment is a key to change and inform human behavior. Do you think there are ways that public spaces can better communicate positive sexual messaging? And have you ever seen any examples of this throughout your research? And I think it's, directed to Dr. Mitchell, but I think Jessie Ford, you'd better also respond to this question. Please, yeah. So no, I'm not muted, sorry. So anyone who would like to tackle the question, happy. Do
you want to take that, Jessie?
Yeah, so was this about the public messaging? Just say, yeah, the public messaging. Yes. Yeah, I think this, absolutely. I think this is so important. The environment, the space, the place, like greatly influences sexual interaction. I mean, we're finding in college settings, we're finding like the way the beds are situated in dorms and private space very much influences sexual assault outcomes. So I would say, I think, yeah, let's put all efforts forward. So I think public spaces with positive messaging, yes, over time, those really matter to people. We've heard that the messaging and the posters in clinical settings really impacts whether people feel safe and whether they feel like they can talk to their provider about pleasure. So yes, I think the public messaging is very key to setting the scene. And it's like these, it's like micro symbols, these like signals to people like, oh, I'm safe here, or, oh, it's okay to think about my sexual health more openly in this context, or it's a reminder that like, this is important. This matters. I have a right to this. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was maybe just going to add something just to connect to Dr. Gumby's presentation. So if we're taking a sort of pleasure and sexual well-being lens to an issue like this, it might be that we start at a different place. So rather than starting with the practices themselves and saying to women, these are damaging, these are harmful, these aren't good for you, stop it. Which might is going to fall on flat ears because they probably understand that at one level already, but that's not what's driving the practices. And so to start with conversations around agency and their pleasure, and not why is it that they're privileging their partner's pleasure over their own pleasure? Why is it they're risking their health for their partner's pleasure? Where's their agency in this? It's a very difficult thing to push at, because you are then pushing at gender inequality and gender norms and scripts around that. But actually, I think starting to have those conversations involving partners, ideally, involving the men as far as we can, and getting them to see that actually, if their partner's having enjoying themselves and having pleasure, that's quite a turn on, and that increases their pleasure. And just shift the conversation a little bit about men stand to benefit from women who are finding sex pleasurable, and not just kind of being there to fulfill men's pleasure. Not easy, but those are the kinds of conversations that I think need to be part of any kind of attempt to address these vaginal tightening practices.
Mm-hmm. We are a bit way over time. So I know we have a few questions that have not been answered yet. But I would like for us to just continue the conversation, pose your questions on our social media pages, and keep the conversations going. But with no further ado, I would like to just thank everyone for their insightful questions. And I just want to express my sincerest thanks to Kirsten, Jessie, and Pam for your valuable input and contributions to this important conversation. And to everyone else, there's a link to an evaluation form of today's webinar, and it's been added to our chat box. So please provide us with some feedback. We would really appreciate that. And our next Women Up to No Good webinar is scheduled for November. So please keep an eye out on our e-newsletter and our social media platforms for more information on this. And also just remember to stay updated on future events. You can find all the links to our social media pages, our e-newsletter on the chat box. And for anyone that has missed any part of this webinar or wishes to revisit it, you can just stream it on YouTube. And just in addition, there's also a summary of this webinar that's been added on the GIFT website. And once again, I just want to thank everyone who has participated today, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar. And it's goodbye from me for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.